First off, everyone needs to
why did you
listen to your
choose
podcast. I think you guys are
management over, let's say,
probably
becoming an
probably my
agent
most favorite
or
industry podcast
management in
out there
general?
because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
When this episode's released, it's been roughly 5 years since the COVID-19 pandemic shut the world down. It's been roughly, well, no, has it been 5? Yeah, it's been 5 years. It's 2025. Yeah, it's been roughly 5 years.
It's funny you say COVID-19. I think about it at 2020.
Yeah.
Because when did COVID first hit?
Well, I remember my first
It was
experience
2020.
It was 2020. Yes, it's been 5 years.
So why'd you say COVID 2019?
I said COVID-19. That's what it's called. It's called COVID-19.
COVID-19. That's
LOL.
right.
This is off to a great start with two morons talking about this.
I completely forgot the 19 part of it.
COVID-19.
Well, and just to be clear, the reason why, so we're doing this bit of a COVID retrospective because as of this release, it will be it's practically literally to the day. I think what we're using partially as a metric is that March 12th, 2020 date.
Because what happened on March 12th? Yeah.
Well, that was the day. That was the day everything shut down. We obviously there had been cases coming in months prior, but
right.
Dribs and drabs. We had the cruise ship, etc. And then there was the 2 weeks buildup when things were getting bad, and I can specifically speak to me, there was an usher on Broadway. I forget what theater, but there was an usher on Broadway who caught COVID, and then that started getting around. Oh, this usher caught COVID, and it was a day-to-day thing where we didn't know what was going on. People were wearing masks to the theater. They cut off we couldn't do stage door anymore. There was no signing. Like, stuff was starting to happen. And so you felt the writing was on the wall. And in fact, actually, I remember I was the one who reached out to the union and management and said, are we still going to get paid? What happens if we shut down? And, Broadway never shuts down, ever. And so it was a real question as to whether or not we'd stay open. And I so specifically remember March 12th. So
because
Wednesday.
I remember that, I think it must have been March 12th, because I remember I was meeting with a client whose boyfriend was making his Broadway debut, and they were in tech.
Okay.
And me and her were meeting at the Signature lobby, which used to be, this is such a stupid thing, but this used to be sort of like, the Signature used to be a spot. It used to be the fucking spot, that on 42nd and 10th or whatever. You would go up there, and it was like it was unknown but known enough where you would see Mandy Patinkin chilling, just reading on the couch, and you see like 4 people you knew, and I remember I would just go there to do work. It was just like sort of like it was like a little hub where I would go and work for a couple hours and get a coffee, whatever. And so we're meeting there, and I remember we were by the window. I remember this very distinctly. We were by the window, and she looks up as she just gets a text, and she looks up and she goes, so and so they just canceled. They just shut it down. They just shut down the show. Text canceled indefinitely, right? And then I remember that day, like, it was such a weird feeling because you walk down on the street, and I think people, it might have even been was it a Wednesday? Because I remember like there were just people out and about, and I just remember it was just like kind of like a hectic, almost exciting energy because it felt like hooky. Like, I remember you posted an Instagram video of you and Jelani like walking out of the theater being like, we're not, you're like, whoa, it's almost like a fun thing. It was like, it's hooky because it was so, I mean, per your point, Broadway never closes for anything. And so that was like,
I remember 3 other instances where shows were closed, canceled. 2 was it was a huge snowstorm in 2015 that shut down the entire subway system, and the trains couldn't run, and that shows were closed then. And then the next one was in 2019, actually, there was a huge power outage that took out most of Manhattan, if you remember. And
Right, and you're talking about
and
like a day or two. You're not
one
talking like
performance, one performance.
and like I remember like what do you remember about that day, you know, doing the show? What do you remember about the day where everything closed down? Like kind of take me back to that.
Well, I don't have a lot of specific details except kind of similarly what I was saying about noticing the changes in the audience and the way management was dealing with things, and you felt like it was creeping up on you.
Yeah.
So and there were so many unknowns, so you never knew what are these masks? What are you talking about? I'm not going to get it. No, you just didn't know. So what I do remember is that I actually, on that March 12th, took a bulk of my stuff home from the dressing room, even though when we formally shut down for good, they gave us one day, like there was like a few hours you were allowed to come back into the theater to get your stuff. And you have to remember, you know, we basically lived there. So that was basically like a second home. I had a bed, you know,
It's
fridge,
fascinating because it was
coffee.
kind of exciting. I don't know why it was it kind of it. I don't know why that's so fucked up, but it's like because yeah, I remember I was doing a show. Actually, I forgot this. I was doing a show at Shetler Studios. You know, they have that theater 54, I think it was called, or whatever. They had a little like it was maybe like 70 seats or something like that. I was doing a show and I had my yoga mat in the dressing room. I had a bunch of shit in the dressing room, and they shut it down. And I left my shit there, and I was like, but there was this. But what's wild is like getting the emails being like, as COVID, and this sort of pivots to the next thing, you know. Like I remember getting emails like, "Hey, like come get your stuff at these times. Like you have this much time to come get your shit." And I didn't have anything super important, and I'm just kind of irresponsible. But like, and then Shetler Studios shut down,
Right, closed.
so it just completely went under, and the theater
Yeah.
completely went under. So who knows where all that shit is? Like the jacket, I had a jacket there, and I had like a yoga mat. That was really the most important shit. But you know, I am curious. I mean, we're going to be talking about a lot of things here, but I'm curious to sort of hear what was the state of the city and lockdown for you like, and how did you really, you know, because I would say that the most intense part of the pandemic was like the first 7 months, right? It was like basically the rest of 2020 was just like. So what was that? I know it's kind of a deep question or kind of a many layered question, but like, what was your takeaway of like the state of the city, lockdown, and those 8 months or whatever it was of just like everything truly being shut down? What was that like for you?
Like just being in New York City with everything shut
Yeah.
down? Well, you know, it was. I mean, I think it was hard for all of us, right? I mean, it was obviously not easy, but especially for my personality because I while I like to be alone, and that's what I loved about COVID. Oh my god, I actually loved the insular nature of it. That part wasn't really bothersome to me. What was bothersome to me was the lack of structure and the lack of movement. So let me be clear, the way that I dealt with it, and this is kind of answers your question. I cooked very, very elaborate 3-course meals.
Yeah, I
Very
remember that. I remember that.
every single day. I would go and get groceries in the morning. I must have spent so much money every single day. And Michael can tell you, and I gained a lot of weight. I mean, I gained a lot of weight because we were inside and I was making these 3-course meals every
COVID
day.
50.
Exactly. COVID more like 70, maybe. I don't know. COVID something. And then similarly, I there were things I started to do. You know, we had that writers group that we started. Caitlin and I started making a lot of. I was 10 years, you know, behind, but we started making about a sketch content. And actually, Mike, to be honest with you, that piece, the sketch, the Morgan and Kemp stuff we were doing we were trying to do too much. So because we released new episodes or sketches every single week.
Wild.
So we were trying to create the episodes, shoot them, market them, and that became a huge part of 2020. But I will say I really valued those things because they again created that structure. And then you and I, of course, were spending that was around the time when you and I really started to talk about this work.
And how long was Ain't Too Proud paying you for after you guys shut down?
We got a big payout. So we shut down, and then they paid us out our vacation, our sick days, and like I think I got like $15,000 or something like that. I can't really remember. It was just like a chunk of cash. But what I did know they did, which was kind of amazing, was they kept paying into all of our health benefits so that we were able to maintain insurance. Because remember, we went back and did it. They wanted to maintain us, keep us. Sorry.
That's awesome.
Wait, what were you doing? What were you doing over COVID?
Oh, God. Whew.
I don't remember.
I mean, we were working a lot on stuff. Well, what was wild...
Oh, were we doing drama?
We were doing drama. We were collaborating on a television series together. Like, I felt like a lot of shit was going on because also I was using the opportunity. I remember I was trying to get an agent at the time. And so what I did was, which was kind of funny, is I was doing like every week I was doing readings over Zoom. Right. And as a way to go like, okay, who are sort of some of the big clients at the agencies I want to sign with? And like, let me use this as an excuse to like just get to know them. Right. So like I was doing like maybe 2 readings a month, private readings over Zoom. Right. And I was able to get really cool people to just come and read a play. And everybody was so grateful. I also, what was great about it was that's when I really built my relationship with Bedlam because, Bedlam was doing these Zoom readings like every couple weeks for the audience. And so I did like maybe like 4 of those and, it'd be like, whatever, like 150 people would show up and watch it or something like that. And that was great. And then what was really a godsend was Bedlam had taken the money they were going to use to produce Crucible. And Eric wrote a series, like an episodic series. And so, I mean, it was wild because it was like 25 people were more, maybe 40 people were employed on this thing. And we got a SAG New Media. It was a SAG New Media contract. And we shot this series for like a month and a half. It was like, and it was wonderful. That's how I got my SAG card. I was making money. And what was wild was we were shooting in New York. We were also shooting upstate. And I remember this very distinctly. We were shooting in remember we did that podcast, the infamous podcast interview that I had to bleep out of the Hannah Pauly. They were putting me up in a private room, beautiful, big private like apartment in Fishkill, New York. And I was there to shoot for 3 days, but somebody on set got COVID. And so I ended up staying there for like a week and a half.
Oh, right. I do remember that.
And it was like, I was just and I was still getting paid. They were bringing meals to me. I mean, it was fucking sick. And then, I remember very distinctly, that's when I started dating my last girlfriend. And she was staying in isolation on a big farm. Let's just say that. And so I would go there and see her. We were building, that was a big part of COVID for me. So like, I remember that time being like, I mean, it was so weird, right? Because like it was actually a time of a lot of opportunity in addition to a lot of obviously tragedy. Full disclosure, we're cutting back. We're recording this many weeks later because we got derailed at an hour-and-a-half conversation. That's kind of unusable. So we're going to now move forward to talking about, after we've shared our personal experiences about COVID and what the pandemic was like for us, we're going to get into what the effects that we are still feeling today of the pandemic and of the COVID-19 virus are. So that's what we're going to get into today, is how they have completely changed the entertainment business on the whole. And I think this is an important point here. You know, the first way that it really did change everything is how many people left the business or basically had their careers completely halted. And I think you were even saying that you felt like this was the case for you at some point. You felt like you were having some momentum, or you were experiencing something like a little bit of movement, and then the complete halt sort of fucked everything up. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I it's not that I felt like I was, in the midst of my height of my 3 Emmy
Sure.
nominations and several, but I definitely felt a lot. I felt a heat, and I think we all did. I don't know if I don't know if you did it. I don't. Okay. Well, but I definitely did, and it was alarming, the change, honestly, for me. And I, to be honest with you, I only now realize it. This is partly why we're even doing this episode, because in looking back now, I only now
Well,
go,
how did it change?
"Oh,
How
wow."
did you feel like, because it's so funny, because I'll be honest with you, and you know, I felt kind of the opposite, as I've said sort of like a couple minutes ago in the intro, in the beginning of this, which we shot 2 weeks ago, which is like I was actually finding a lot of movement for myself like during the pandemic. So it didn't feel like anything was halted for me. But what felt like it was halted for you? Like what ended? Like were you meeting a ton of people? Did you have a bunch of projects that were sort of developing that sort of got halted? Like what exactly was halted when you talk about this?
Well, I had just gone into my second year with Ain't Too Proud, and I can't remember if I had signed a year or a 6-month contract, but the reason that matters is because the show was a hit,
Right?
and there was still buzz around it, and people were still coming, and it was still something that I could, in theory, have leveraged a bit and transitioned out of into something else that could have also had some excitement, and I knew that, and I've said this, I was a little complacent in 2018 and 19, because, to be honest with you, I just liked making the paycheck, and I really didn't. I was auditioning, but I was really, and this is a good example, I was really focusing on TV and film, and I was getting.
I see. Really that's interesting, because.
And I want to say, and just to say this though, because I'd be lying if this wasn't a big part of it. I did gain a lot of weight in the pandemic, and when I came out, especially for what people had.
Everybody's beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. Everybody is beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. Have you seen that, like the what is it, the food czar of San Francisco? Have you seen like the interview with this person? She's like the health and services administrator in like San Francisco, and she's like 400 pounds. We just lost like 4 listeners. Anyway, but so that was,
and she was one of them.
Yeah, so that was. It's funny. I actually lost 90 pounds during the pandemic.
I remember you came and took all of our clothes.
Right. Now those are, rags I used to wash the dishes. But anyway, it's interesting, those little tiny twink shirts that you and Michael had. Anyway, but it's just interesting, like really
2011.
Like, exactly. Are we going to bleep out names? Because I'm thinking of a specific somebody whose name is written down, so I'm not going to say this person's name. But this is somebody who was, I think, a lead in a Broadway show.
Oh yes, no, this is a great example.
I think this person was like leading a major Broadway show, and this person's not in the business anymore. And again, I am not saying
no, they are. They just came back.
They just came back.
You're talking about this three person name. Yes, I only know because they just did a reading for me, and they had done it. Oh, you saw it. You saw the reading. That they were in. Yes, you did. Remember the musical, and he was the lead of it.
I did not see that, but that's okay. I did not see that. But
okay. Well, so he just moved back because, just to be clear, to your point, this person was a career, and not just the lead of that Broadway show. He had got that Lortel win for that other big play. He had done a ton. He moved out of state with his wife and was like, I'm not going to say what they were doing. No,
they had a side business that was really cool. And like they were sort of like, but they were really marketing the shit out of that, where they were like, they were doing, and it was just so fascinating to see this person, because I had worked with this person too, and literally like their star was on the rise because they got that Lortel win, and they were like really like. Then they booked that big Broadway show, and they were doing the show and then it just completely, and this person was gone. You know, are there other people? Exactly. You know, I even think of a client that I had, who's great. You know, who I think you'll know is this person was working a ton before the pandemic, was working on television, was like doing. I mean, I think had a series regular kind of spot on this very popular Netflix show. And then this person just completely, everything stopped. Just everything completely stopped for them. And that's the story of so many people who are working, who are auditioning a ton. And then it's like a complete, you know, and that's the thing, right? Is there is such a thing as momentum. You're going in for things a lot. You're booking things. Then these people hear about you and they see you, and then you're hot for a moment. I mean, like Rashad says, when you're hot, or whatever. You know, it's like when you're hot, everybody wants you. And so people who had momentum just being completely shut down, and then moving out of state, leaving the business, you know, because I think a lot of people also kind of realized it during the pandemic, how sort of like unstable it was, almost like getting some air for a second. And it feels like people were like kind of like, fuck that, like even if it does come back, this kind of just proved how sort of unstable this all is.
I think this is huge because you know, we've been having a lot of conversations recently about essentially the hypothesis coming true.
Sure.
And that's kind of how I think about this, because to your point, I know for those watching, I continue to change my lighting, but it's because the sun changes, and then
literally it's just Joshua's just a huge screen, just staring at himself as that's so disturbing. You're just literally have your huge face on the screen. You're just talking and changing the light.
Well, my eyes and my lips, they're just so, you know, they just draw you in, you know. No, but I don't know if you think this at all, but I just want to be clear. You know, much of what you and I have been talking about really recently, I would argue in many ways these are not new concepts. We are just actually seeing a hypothesis of that maybe didn't feel quite as dire or pronounced,
and the hypothesis being,
well, that we should never have been relying on the industry and the business as we know it, because the industry and the business was never going to be our stepping stone to sustainability. We have this here. If your only plan is to be employed by others as an artist of some kind, that's highly risky. And with now, just to be clear, and I would argue that in this second digital revolution of some kind, given COVID, with AI, you know, butting its head in here, I think we are now, our backs are up against a wall.
Well, like, and you know, this is great podcast, because I can't give examples, but there were examples of people who I just keep hearing things, like I'll hear interviews, like little interviews with people who like like who really, it's like, well, how did you start I think about someone like Gus Haggerty. You know, he's like,
Yes.
well, the pandemic, you know, it's like people
Yes.
used people who were
Right.
there were people who used the pandemic to build more of an independent infrastructure for themselves in some way.
Yes.
I mean, I hear it all the
Yes.
time whenever I'm sort of listening to people or watching interviews or talking to people. It's like, well, how did you do this? How did this thing happen? A lot of people said, well, it started in 2019 during shutdown when everybody else was when there was nothing else to do, when I didn't have anything else to do. You know, some people, you know, leveraged that creative spirit, and I'm not saying like this isn't to be like shame on the people who didn't, because you know I didn't necessarily do that either entirely, but it kind of was a case study of like the people who were used to being employed by somebody really struggled, and the people who were more used to creating things did better. It's just
That's a good point.
it's just
or if I may, because you heard this a lot, people who discovered their entrepreneurialism or their entrepreneurial interests or their and so to your point, like the pandemic did afford an opportunity that was really interesting, and a lot of it came from, just to be clear, the shift to the digital landscape, and that is ultimately where there was a fork in the road. And if I'm being quite honest, Mike, as I reflect on this, what a missed opportunity for us in some ways, because even though I was, doing some online stuff with, that stuff we were doing with Caitlin, I want to go back and watch our little sketch that you and I did during that. I forget what, but I actually, here's a good example. I think I've said this to you before, but I remember Caitlin being like, we got to get on TikTok. We've got to be on TikTok. TikTok is where it's at. And I was like, ugh, and so that was a bit of a missed opportunity, because I think people who primarily not all, but primarily capitalized on the shift to online really made the most of it.
And I think that's a really good point, because and one missed opportunity I think with this sort of digital revolution for me personally is, I think about Will Connell, who, like William Connell's a great actor. And look, Will works pretty consistently, but it's not like he's like, a huge name or something. Like he's in Othello right now, on Broadway, and he's like, understanding Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's in these, but he moved to North Carolina during the pandemic. And I think that this just has to be said as a major change, is that so many people moved out of the hubs, and there are people who have careers, and don't live in Los Angeles or New York. And a big reason for that is because of, the only reason for that is the digitalization of everything. It's because, not to take the basic bitch example, but like self-tapes, you can, everything's self-tapes. You don't have to give appointments anymore. But so much of it is that a digital audience has no borders. So if somebody is very popular on TikTok or Instagram or has a following here or there, it doesn't matter if they live in Kentucky or if they live wherever, they can, that audience carries. So the physical boundaries being sort of lifted I think is really an understated sort of example of how so much has changed, because it's also made the hubs like Los Angeles and New York, a lot less appealing in some ways. It's like Los Angeles really, has been in the shitter since I would argue New York, since the pandemic, has really been in the shitter. So it's like these cities that were the central hubs, now people are moving to other places and building art there, and that can transfer into a New York career easier, a Los Angeles career easier, if you have a digital audience of some kind. That like a whole new, and we've been talking about this, like, but a whole new world has been created online. an entirely new market world is online now, and people are more used to being there. And you know, you and I talk about this, but all the old sort of, whether it's, you know, it used to be like social media and email marketing and all of this shit, this was seen as like just marketing. Now it's not. Now it is. Now it's a world where you have to cultivate community. Now it's a world where you have to create your own work. Yes, marketing is a piece of being on social media. Marketing is a piece of that, but it's actually not, you know, nearly all of it's a small piece of just being a digital citizen. And now people are digital citizens. And the pandemic was obviously, you know, a big part of that.
Well, it's interesting you're saying that, just because we're going to do an episode all about I like that, you know, the digital citizen idea, but just to say what you're bringing up is this idea of community online. And I think that is a mindset shift to go, oh, that's a community,
right,
and I want to be part of a community online in some ways. And you said this, actually, it's an interesting concept. It's not about growing an audience, it's about growing a community.
No, like the equivalency I've been using is like, you know, it used to be like you would use like artists who hate social media use it to literally just promote their work or market their work. Now that would be like showing up in a town and trying to sell something or get people to come see a show without knowing anybody in the fucking town. It's like you need to go to the town and be a person there and be a member of the community there, which and then you can eventually promote things and market things, but it's really just a different world.
It's funny, Mike, you know, this relates, but sorry for the tangent. If we cut it, but so this theater, you know, I'm not going to say too much, but I've been watching and looking at their online stuff, and everything is a picture of the show they're doing. Like, come now, tickets so traditional. Come, it's only running now. Gotta get your tickets. And as exactly, no value add, no like here's even like a someone even talking about the what it means. It's just a picture. Come buy the tickets.
Engaging,
and that's not the world we live in.
You know, not to go on but like, yeah, engaging, literally the theater engaging with people, commenting on things, starting conversations.
And you know what?
Citizen.
I comment on nearly every post, and no one ever engages back. Exactly. You know, and you know what story it tells you? Oh, I'm not part of that community.
Right. Well, it tells you the story too of that this person's literally just here to sell things. And that's not interesting.
That's a great point.
That's not interesting to anybody.
So yes, everything moved online, and actually, but this is kind of a big one, and I think you and I've also been talking about this, and I've been thinking about this more and more. Art moved online, and while that's not necessarily, again, a huge new conceit for us as individual artists, I think the challenge now becomes, how do we now consider the online space as part of our art share? And that's not just, oh, this is my sketch on da-da-da. It can be so many things.
Yeah.
But here's partly why, and like when you talk about like Gus Haggerty, his art, you know, he's sharing his art online in a lot of ways. But here's I would argue, you know, part of what that means. In the digital space, that means you actually have to have, in my opinion, other considerations. Meaning, if you're sharing on Instagram or you just based on the platform alone,
sure,
that is going to shape what you are creating.
Well, I mean, just think about, even because I think kind of what I'm hearing too is that, like, when you say art moved online, I mean, this was the rise of sort of the alternative media landscape, right? It's like, because whether it's podcasts, whether it's, you know, Substack, right? Like, you know, it's funny, right? Like, even take podcasts and Substack, you know, which are sort of two like micro version, like, you know, cosms or subliminations or whatever of like the Trump marketing strategy. You know, these blew up. Podcasts were always doing well, they blew up during the pandemic because, again, people were online, and also there was so much institutional weakness happening, right? So it's like, there was media companies were hurting, right? And maybe not able to produce, well, definitely not able to produce at the level they were, or pay people, or pay their journalists what they were paying them, or so it weakened sort of institutional structures, which caused sort of like these new pockets to really see an exponential growth.
Well, because do you remember when Quibi died?
Yeah. What was
so?
Quibi
This was such a good idea, and this relates to this. So Quibi launched the week the pandemic really took off. That March, billions of investments, and they had some big stars, and it was short form content for only your device. The concept being that more and more people were watching things on their devices, so when they were traveling to and from work, really. The problem was when the pandemic hit, everyone was on their devices, but everyone was just still watching on TV. And so no one signed up for Quibi.
Yeah.
And so Quibi completely shuttered. And the reason why this relates to this idea is because, and this is what I mean by art transferring online, then, and let me I want to be clear about what I mean by this. When I say art transferring online, I mean thinking about TikToks as art and not thinking about TikToks as content.
Well, this is why probably also Quibi didn't work, is because the assumption, right, is that people are going to want prestige traditional media. They're going to want that like alongside of their TikToks. And it's sort of like it's not really about form as much as is also just about like this movement towards authenticity. How come, I think this authenticity, like cameras being, commercials being shot candidly with cameras or whatever. It's like, why also did this sort of authenticity movement happen during this time as well in some ways? Is it
probably in large part because of something like TikTok. Just so many people had so much time on their hands, and then found themselves in this position of communicating with people. And next thing you know, there's this huge revolution,
and people aren't connecting in person, right?
The everyday person being online,
right? Exactly, more because they didn't have work, or because they weren't going to work because they weren't. So, it's funny that like more of this produced prestige content is not as interesting as
well. I'll never forget. I'll never forget. Sorry, I'm so sorry to keep cutting you off.
No,
I'm trying to be rude, but I'll never forget the Caitlin. So Caitlin and I were making all these sketches, and I think I said this at the beginning of the episode. So, sorry for repeating myself. But we posted one TikTok, Mike, and it was a duet. And by the way, we put a lot of money and time into producing. It wasn't the highest of quality, but we put a lot of time in this TikTok. It was someone doing a dance, and Caitlin was like, "Just do it, just watch it once, and then duet it." And we duetted the dance, and it was just like me like jumping around trying to do it. Millions of views, millions,
right?
And it was so underproduced. To your point about what people like, they just want. And like that TikTok I just made that went viral, it's because it's such a simple, relatable idea. It's not, to your point, overly produced. But either way, I would also argue just to say, part of what I think this has asked, why are plays one acts? Why are plays getting shorter and shorter?
Howdy. Well, they're two, and they're all two people. It's all, everything is like a two-person, literally TV shows are also, the cast sizes have drastically shrunk during the pandemic as well. Cast sizes across all things. And it's like people realized like what we don't have to have a humongous cast to make money or to do what. Then fuck that. Let's just, I'm sure there are ways that are not coming to my mind now, where also like studios, producers found ways to cut. They were like, this actually doesn't make a difference, let's cut it. Or let's not do this. Let's not invest in this thing if it doesn't make that much of a difference.
Sure.
And so, yeah, no, literally, you're right. It has changed the art landscape because it has made, I think, things smaller, things faster, attention spans.
We have a very short exactly. I mean, if I may, when I directed Virginia Woolf, a big part of why I said it in the now was because I did not see an audience in Flint, Michigan going to see a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf set
right
60 years ago, and being able to take that in 3.5 hour play without it having some spice and or a little more. I just didn't see it happening.
Right.
Maybe in New York, but in Flint, Michigan, you really have, and I'm not coming for Flint, by the way. I'm saying this because this is the world we live in. It's like, what's people going to respond to?
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And just this, audience behavior. I think this is, audience behavior is different. I mean, look, we're still, I think, like, we're still down like something like, we're down. It's funny. The box office for 2024 is like 3.5% down from 2023, which is obviously down from 2019. Like, it is never going to reach. I mean, we don't have to even speak about this. It's like, it's never going to reach the same level. People going to the movie theater is probably never going to reach the same level as it did, pre-pandemic.
Why would it?
Well, what's funny is I was reading somebody's take on now here we go, another controversial opinion. Somebody was like, there was this producer who was talking about how nobody thanked movie theaters in their Oscar speech until Sean Baker did it, I guess. I didn't watch it, but until he accepted the best, and he was like, save movie theaters.
Did you see Honora?
Huh? No, I didn't see any of them.
Did you see
and this woman was saying, like, it's like what a travesty that, like, the movies that the Oscars didn't honor movie theaters. And this goes to, like, now I'm going to say something that kind of leads. It's like, who cares? It's like, who gives a shit? Like, not to be rude, but like, are people in Flint, Michigan, or people who have, of all things, why would they be passionate about theaters, keeping movie theaters opening just because? Why does this matter? And but you know what I mean? It's like, of all the things to worry about in the world, it's like,
of course,
keep movie theaters open, and this should be like a major.
My only guess is that it's like an Arturian approach. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, it's like, I mean, because listen, movies, the reason why the collapse of the movie theater is literally tragic. It's because, like, why it is like a death knell in the movie industry is because, like, that's where one could really make money. You made money at the box office. That's not like entirely, it is absolutely like a creative thing, right? It's like, my movie must be seen in movie theaters, but it's also because, like, the model of getting millions of people to come pay $10, $15, $20 for a movie ticket. That's how movies made money. Now, in this new age, it's much more difficult to figure out how to monetize, the monetization model when, like, showing movies is becoming less and less of an opportunity. And also, it supported, the reason why the movie theaters did support the movie industry is because millions of dollars went into marketing the movies, right? So millions of dollars went into marketing the movies because you wanted millions of people to come see the movie. So they were being promoted. Whereas now, we've talked about this, it's like when something's on a streamer, if I have Netflix will publicize the movie to me. They don't need to spend money on the movie. So there's not as much brand awareness or of what movies are coming out. right? And
Yeah.
so I say this because this was probably going to happen anyway with movie theaters, but this is the death. This is the death knell of the traditional movie industry, not of movies,
Sure.
of the traditional movie industry, right?
And isn't that every industry ever has some goes
well,
through that
take
wave?
take like nonprofit theaters, right? It's like nonprofit theaters. How many nonprofit theaters sort of collapsed or completely, it's like, it's funny because it really did just sort of expose the weakness, right? Like Steppenwolf did Steppenwolf need like two massive fucking like theaters and like hundreds of staff members working for the? It's like, do you need all of that?
Wait, what happened to Steppenwolf?
Well, remember Steppenwolf had like a lot of like, they had to lay off like tons, because like I think right before the pandemic,
Vaguely.
like they had some massive, I think they built another building or another office or something crazy, and they had hundreds of people working for that. I mean, it kind of just so these nonprofit theaters had to like really parse down, right? And it's interesting that in the theater scene, things like adult film, things like Brooklyn Center for Theater Research, just sort of this loft theater thing has sort of started to come up in New York, and more indie stuff has started to come up in New York, and even commercial off Broadway. Like, why has commercial off Broadway become bigger since the pandemic? It's probably because there has been, the pandemic sort of challenged sort of like bureaucracy, right? It's sort of challenged sort of like built structures. If you have a show that's its own entity, that like you just have like a team that's producing that, as opposed to like a team that has to run an entire institution, that's harder to maintain, right? So
For sure.
Anyway, whatever. So
no, yes. So let's move on. Only for time, because I can already tell.
So the cultural divide.
Also, but before
please.
I forget, we did see we saw Nora in North Carolina. How at the movie theater? Speaking of movie theaters, how much do you think our ticket was? Out of curiosity.
$7.
$6.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
$6. That's insane.
It's wild.
Anyway, okay.
So another big consequence of the pandemic, I think, on the arts industry was, look, since Trump got elected, there was already starting to be this narrative, true or not, my dear little friends out there, don't hurt me. There's starting to be this divide between sort of like the artistic elite and everyday people, right? We talked about this a lot in the Trump episode, basically how because Hollywood, Broadway, rightfully, wrongfully, however you want to put it, took a very strong stance against Trump, it automatically isolated them from half of America in some ways. They pinned themselves as adversarial to half of America. And we're talking.
I'll also say though, if I may, they were pinned. Our friend Donald does not like it when you do not do exactly what he says. And if you don't do exactly what he says, he will make sure that, to your point, half of America sees you as a villain. And the reason I think this is important to underline is, and I think you would agree, discourse, disagreements, agreements, whatever, bring them on. Right? Who cares? I mean, if anything, you are someone who
sure
wants people to feel free to believe exactly whatever they want to believe and say it out loud and follow suit. I think if anything, part of the implication is that, if anything, these folks in our sort of liberal world of the arts are a bit sheepish. And if anything, but
I don't know if I agree with that, but I think it's a mutual thing where, sure, absolutely, everything you're saying, yes. Where
I just don't think they pinned themselves. That's all I'm saying.
they pinned themselves.
That was you said they pinned them. They were basically pinned against half of America.
They pinned themselves. They took a stance, right? And during, because right before the pandemic, there was this sort of, this is where, like, there was this, like, the big DEI push and big sort of like anti-Trump rhetoric and all of this stuff, and automatically you're starting to, again, as alternative media is rising, you need to leave it alone. It's really sick. It's sick. It's a little sick. It's a little sick.
It's really for that. I
no,
swear,
it's not
I
for
just
them.
don't
They
want
don't
it to
care.
be.
It's
But I really do. I've got 3, by the way.
Yeah,
I've got 3 lights and
it's
my
sick.
thing. Yeah.
Anyway, but happy birthday. But and so the pandemic was another moment, because it was such a politicized thing, vaccines, masks, whatever. It was another instance where people had to, quote, choose sides in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was another moment where, Hollywood, the artistic elite in this country sort of became even more in a bubble, rightfully or wrongfully.
Mm-hmm.
They became more in a bubble. And, like an example would be, the vaccine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody, an actor, New York, got the vaccine, got really sick. This person said that they got sick from the vaccine and was completely ostracized and was bullied online by her friends and whatever, and basically was completely shut down. And this person is still suffering some effects of a vaccine illness. There are people like Laura Osnes, or people like Letitia, Letitia Wright from Black Panther. It's like who expressed some anti-vax opinions, and these people, rightfully or wrongfully, were ostracized from our business, right? And so, the only thing I'm saying about that is that, again, in a very sort of tribalized moment we're in with this country, across this whole country, unfortunately, COVID was another thing where people had to choose sides, where people dug their heels in, where there was more outrage, where there was more of a reason to attack people. And this still is something that affects, it's funny, I did a show a little bit ago, and there was somebody in the show who wasn't vaxxed. There was somebody who was not vaxxed in the show. And everybody, it's all, did you hear about, like, there was like all of this judgment of this person, however you, rightfully, wrongfully, whatever, but it has changed the culture of the artistic, of the artistic bubble we live in. Do you agree with this, or not really?
The reason why this one is a tough one for me in relation to our industry is because we were not alone.
Yes.
If there were other industries that
but
and there were plenty of people, by the way.
Changed our. I'm not saying that we weren't alone. It changed the whole. It changed everything, and people. And it was hyper. But it did have effects on our industry that, yes, are not unique to it per se, but I think that it did fortify sort of like a liberal bubble. The pandemic fortified a liberal bubble around.
I think that's right.
It just made that bubble stronger.
Well, we didn't say her name, but Laura Osnes is a super interesting example, to your point, of someone who, and this is very public, so this isn't me, even though I did have this conversation with him. I remember her and Santino Fontana were going to do a concert together, and I forget where, and so don't kill me on all the details, but they were going to do a concert together somewhere. She wasn't vaccinated. The venue was going to cancel the concert, and I think they called Santino, or someone called Santino, and Santino I think tried to have a convo with Laura Osnes, and I don't think he was trying to vilify her about the vaccine, but she just wasn't comfortable. And subsequently, let's be clear, she was practically removed from the industry. This is someone whose career, yeah, and now she lives in, I think, Nashville, and
well, the equivalent, and it is similar again, and this is to like McCarthyism, right? Like McCarthyism affected more than just Hollywood. Obviously, McCarthyism was a national sort of thing, but it did have very specific implications on Hollywood. That's what this was in some ways, right? It's like it became a us versus them. It became like a who's wearing a mask in a rehearsal room, who's not, who's vaccinated, who's not, and so it did sort of create this thing. And so, it's just interesting that, it's funny, right? Because like I even take, again, rightfully or wrongfully, I have very good friends who are very, 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 very conservative, very Trump. These are childhood friends of mine, a family. And, they wanted to see me in a play. And they were like, it's like you have to show your vax card and you have to wear a mask in the theater. And they were like, we're not going to do that. They're sorry. It's like and it just showed them, again, whatever. It showed them more that, oh, this is not a space where I can go. This is not a space where I am welcome or where I am already like, it's not somewhere I'm super comfortable. But now it's even more so a place I'm not
and let me say this. While I understand that might feel uncomfy to feel unwelcome in a space, I would argue that it's uncomfy for some people to die. And so
of course,
where I get a little outweighed is I'm like, cool, as long as you're cool, don't if you make your decisions, live your life.
I'm not gonna.
What I just want to be clear though is like what I have an issue with is people then vilifying or like, again, if it's on both sides, if you want to require masks and vaccine and proof of vaccination, and I don't feel comfortable with that, okay, that's okay. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to participate. We go on. I can be disappointed that you don't see my point of view, and that person could be institution, whatever, could be disappointed that but 'tis what 'tis. And where I have issues is when on both, and this I think is partly your point, the person who, well, fuck you, no, okay, no, please, you're making your decision, and same on the other side. Don't vilify them. They don't want to do it.
No, the thing I'm going to say is no, and that's the thing is I'm not passing moral judgment. All I am saying is that it has created more of a bubble around the arts industry. Yeah, that could be a righteous bubble from somebody's. That could be a bubble of righteousness and a bubble of this is how it should be. Or it could be a whatever bubble you want. The reason why we got into why we're re-recording all of this is because it got too personal with talking about my opinions about all this shit. All I'm saying is that it is because.
But I just want to be clear.
No, I think you would argue.
The reason why I said that is there was a point of view when you say it might not. Well, because when you make the point that someone comes to the show and you said they felt like that wasn't a space for them. The point of view that I hear was that those people
are victims. Shut out. I'm not exactly saying that. What I'm trying to say is actually that's even though part of me may think that's actually not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that it is that the arts industry is on an island. It's put them more on an island.
Yeah.
That island could be that they're 1,000% right on everything, but it has put them more on an island. Whereas the arts industry used to have more of and there are many reasons to this. It's because of political stuff. It's because of the rise of alternative media. It's because of all of these things, right? It used to be that art was, had the arts, Hollywood, Broadway, theater institutions, regional, they had more of a monopoly on being entertainment for everybody.
Yep.
Now that is not the case. Like I said, you could believe that the island they're on is a perfect island. I'm not saying that that's why I'm, if that, does that make sense why I'm saying it's not?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. But we have this question here, and then we should move on because who knows how long this episode is going to be.
Yep.
We had this question. Regardless, did it hurt the industry to be so on one side? To your point, of it being a bit of an island, I would argue that yes, it ultimately did. But then to go back to my point, they certainly were not alone. It could be hospitality, entertainment. It doesn't matter. The global response, for the most part, was to stay unified in their thinking of masking and isolation. I understand ultimately why certain people felt affronted by that, and even certain people, there are going to be serious or less so serious casualties to the idea of the vaccine. But either way, I think they just fell in line with what the world was doing. Just to say,
nope, I don't disagree with that. And if anybody ever wants to hear my conspiracy theories, they're more than welcome to DM me. And this is interesting because I do want to say this. COVID was one of the largest shifts in wealth ever in the world. Isn't that just interesting? And why do I think this relates to, this is not just in the arts industry, but just to be clear, billionaires doubled their income during the depths of the pandemic. More billionaires were minted during this time than ever before. Right? To me, this further, again, how does this relate to us as artists? Well, as we can see, we are moving in a direction where the working class, the middle class, is being cut out, where it is disappearing. I would argue that we should take that as happening in our industry as well, not just in and again, as AI happens, as all of these things can take skilled labor away from people, there's going to be there's the bottom of the barrel, and then there's the top of the barrel. Right. So it's like, and there's not really much. And to be clear, what this applies, at least from an actor's perspective, is this idea of just consistent bookings of like, I'm a working actor who pays his bills through like consistent bookings. I would argue that you're either probably a star in some way or a name talent, or you're nothing. That's kind of what I would say is kind of happening in the in artistic industries.
Well, this is a thought that's more meant just for Mike and not you, but it kind of relates. So you'll decide if you want to keep it or not. This was my point yesterday when I was texted. We recorded another episode that will be coming out at some point on the idea of unmet potential. And I texted, we were talking about entrepreneurialism and in this, and late stage capitalism, and the rise of the individual, and I think more so, again, this hypothesis of artists in particular being put in this position to essentially self-man their ships and steer the course, and a real, I think, reckoning of what that means, because it's not just exactly what you're saying. Because let me be clear, Mike, you and I have also said this. Well, we've long understood and believed in independence and self-responsibility when it comes to, our own creative output and careers. There's always a door that could knock. And still to this day, I mean, I won't go into it. I'm happy to tell you, but like, as of 3 days ago, I actually am up for this Broadway show that would start in 10 days. I'd get it in 10 days. And that would be amazing for a lot of obvious reasons that more about. But the point is that we hold on to that, right? And I think we've long held on to that shit. But the truth is that it goes as quickly as it comes. And I think that idea has become even more erased. And this is why I'm saying, when we were messaging about this idea of entrepreneurialism and the pressures and what that means, and late stage capitalism, to your point about the wealthy getting wealthier and the middle class completely disappearing, as everything costs more and more and more, and we're forced to make more and more and more money at a moment when there's opportunity being taken away from us more and more and more. It's putting us in this position where our backs are up against a wall, and I again,
right.
you decide if you want to keep this, because
No,
the thing I'll say is this: I think this is ultimately the conversations you and I have been having about, do we lean in to the beast? Do we continue to feed the beast, or do we actually revolt against it? And the pandemic only
100%
continued to put more pressure and feed it more.
And also was a time where people did sort of say, I don't know, fuck it. A lot of people kind of did say, and look, I don't, it's whatever can make somebody happy, right? It's like, but yeah, I think you're summing it up really well. As we are in a moment that's what I feel very much in this moment of like, of sort of like my back up against the wall, and I'm like, well, what, do I just keep going? Well, what exactly am I even fighting for? What exactly is it that I'm fighting for? It's like, it's just sort of a moment of, and yeah, the pandemic absolutely increased that, and this does, I mean, think about just, I mean, not to be whatever, but I know I say I don't have much to say about the mental health piece, but just think about just how sad it is that there are people who have graduated school who have never known this business, who have never known this industry pre-pandemic.
I
actually do kind of want to speak about this, but what was, besides these practical considerations, what was different? What was different, even at a very low point when like Trump was president, right? Which was a very sort of low point in a lot of ways. What was different pre-pandemic about the business, like, and how in the mental health aspect, I would argue that there is much more anarchy now. I would argue that because artistic institutions are weak, legacy sort of artistic, things like Sundance, things like, Broadway, things like even, grants that people used to get, or all this kind of shit, like there's such weakness around this, because per your point about, well, I could always get a knock on the door. It was easier to believe that when the structure was stronger. And so I think that there is in general more of a sense of true anarchy since the pandemic. There is more of a sense of like, the emperor has no clothes, everybody's struggling, why do I have to do these things? Because I just have to do them. So I think that there's more cynicism during this time, and I think that there is more of an anarchistic sort of viewpoint.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it, and especially again, it's both interesting the rise of the individual and the collapse of the individual. And what do I mean by that? We're sort of all homogenizing and fighting for like pops of individuality, and that's what people seem to be seeking out, to your point about authenticity. But at the same time, like as AI and robots continue to push us back, it'll be interesting to see what this evolution ultimately becomes, because how it relates to us as artists, I just want to say too, I think again, you are to the in a very, very basic sense, and we might have said this earlier or not, this ability to create art and grow your own audience is an incredibly powerful idea in a moment, and I would argue that it probably is the most effective revolution to enact if we as artists want to try to push through this. And I think you and I have been talking about that.
Let me give you an example of like how burnout manifests for me. right, in relation to like, sort of like the mental health aspect of COVID. I was listening to this guy, Matthew Pine, who runs like the Bitcoin Policy Institute. This guy's a fucking, and I know nothing about Bitcoin, but this guy's a fucking genius. I mean, like the way he talks about everything is just he's one of the smartest people I've ever heard speak. But basically, everything, society is a construct, money is a construct, the familial unit is a construct, that we have to buy into. And what the pandemic did was, it was a moment where so much that we have bought into was weakened, where truth and were like things like a strong government, things like, that so many things were just challenged because it was a catastrophic moment, in so many ways. Businesses that seemed like they would last forever were collapsing. So
yes,
nobody knows what to believe anymore. And so let me give you an example of like what the struggle has been for me. I agree with you on an intellectual level that to achieve X goal, building an audience is the best way to do it. Of course, I agree with that. But where I feel burnout, and where I talk about anarchy, or sort of like there's another word for it, but whatever, is it's hard for me to even buy into that idea. Not because I don't believe it's in a objective, removed from me sense, like that is how you do it. That is how you can effectively, building a direct audience and being able to make art for them directly is the best way to do it. But because so much it's hard for me to even believe in anything anymore. It's hard for me to even put my belief in any type of anything, because so much during the pandemic was like the rug getting pulled out from under us, and things that we thought were true are things that we bought into that were important.
So what does that leave you with?
I think what a lot of people are experiencing, what a lot of, this is Gen Alpha. This is what Gen Alpha is. Gen Alpha doesn't give a fuck about anything. Gen Alpha is a, things that are so important to us, like the purpose of life is to live your dreams, or following your passion, and that you can do anything, or hard work pays off. These sort of like massive things that we just buy into and believe that should be the nature of life. People are having trouble even buying into these ideas. They're having trouble buying into these ideas to begin with. And so where does that leave you? I'm not sure. I mean, it leaves you in a very unstable moment, and it leaves you in a moment where, a lot of people are lost. And you know what it's like, even funny, like the last thing I'll say about it's like this idea of goal setting, right? Like you and I've been questioning sort of the idea of like, why set goals? And it's like, well, what do you mean why not set goals? It's like, if you want something, you need to set goals. It's even hard to buy into that idea sometimes for me, and I feel like this is a result of watching truths or pillars of truth collapsing. And so it's even hard to buy into sort of things that we take for granted as universal truths in some ways. Does that make any sense, what I'm saying?
It does. Well, this was I'm laughing because, what I don't know how much, again, I don't know if we'll keep all this. So if you're hearing this, we should to keep it. But this was just my point about, I hope you hear what I'm saying about a hypothesis coming true, that this was the barrel of the gun. Because what's different right now than what we were saying? Besides the fact that now we have truly less options. This is my point about waiting for the knock, knock, knock. Now this is it. The writing was on the wall, and it took something like the pandemic specifically to just push us over it.
Well, let me give you an example of what's different, actually. And this is going to be why is so much Gen Z people going to trade school, getting regular jobs? Why are they doing that? I think it's for a couple reasons, but our generation was raised with this idea of like the dream of life is to do your passion for a living. That's not true. That is a belief system. That's a belief system. It's not a truth of anything. It could be something one wants. It could be something, but at the end of the day, that's not something you could hold in your hands. It's just an idea. And what I'm saying is what's different about what we're saying is like, well, does that have to be true? Is that actually a truth? That the ultimate form of living life to the fullest is like doing your passion all the time or making money from your passion. This is what I mean by a truly anarchistic moment of, I feel like what these sort of things that you and I just believe are and are absolutely, why would these not be the goals, or why would these are all being challenged. And so people are having trouble buying into things that, you know, that we hold dearly, as should be the point of life or something like that.
Yes. I do understand what you're saying. I think, but where I bring it back in a very basic sense, this is where I understand like the meaning part, right? Meaning that, ironically, I definitely get the essentially, what is the meaning of life, and are we caught up in the wrong rat race of it all?
Well, this is what the mental health burnout piece is, I think, of COVID.
I'm not even really, but just so you know, I haven't even been thinking about it through that lens.
Sure.
What we're just, I know what the outline says, but I'm saying this because no, and I hear how you're making that correlation, but when I make the point that it feels like a bit of a reckoning with the hypothesis coming true, is my point about, okay, but still then the question of, with this responsibility now truly being at my feet, and to your point, looking at the meaning essentially of life and the world we're in and what our purpose is and what brings us happiness and how to live in this world that's slowly crumbling. How do we achieve things we may want to achieve? You know, how do we literally achieve them, like in the micro? And how do we not get caught up in the beast of it all while also working right alongside it? Because if I may,
if you so choose,
and I want to give you a good example. When the guy, you remember the guy I told you about who was complaining that we don't have a national theater?
Sure.
And I was like, we'll make one. Go make it. And that's my point about, for me in my lifetime, like the fight that I'm going to fight is about trying to make art for as long as I can, using the system as I know it. There are people who want to actively fight the system. I actually, and you've heard me say this, I think this is our way of doing it. This is my point about the rise of even thinking about the online space. This is your concept, by the way, as not uniquely mine, but using the online space that's trying to consume us to basically try to win. But let me say this, to your point, where you're making a really good point. My version of quote unquote winning is playing the system at itself.
Well, I'm not even, it's funny because this is, it's related, but I think where the true anarchy comes into play is people realizing that what they wanted, the reason why the pandemic was so interesting, why so many people moved to Mexico or became digital nomads, and people are not having kids, it's because all of the things that people thought they wanted out of life they realized they didn't really want that much. That it was imposed on them. This idea of self-actualization, this idea of achieving the most perfect life of whatever somebody's version of that is. That's it's a baser thing than just playing a game or not playing a game, or it's I think what the reason why people feel burnout is because people are chasing dreams and they don't know why they're chasing them. They're chasing like a life, and this, when we talk about unmet potential, this is sort of like why does one, it's like an example of like people who have left why does one have to make money from their art? Why is that the goal? Why can't it just be
who said that, out of curiosity?
Well, I think it's a generational thing. I think our generation.
But what do you mean? Let me, because this one, you agree that a concept or not, if you want someone to go give you water that they purchased, and then you have to pay for it.
100%.
So I guess where I'm getting caught is if I know we need money to live, and I would ideally like to be doing as much of my art as possible, as much of the time as possible.
Sure.
Then the conceit my art being monetized makes sense. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, but I think the difference is that one can go. We were taught that like the ultimate thing about life is having a purpose. That is, I think, our generation, because our parents did things that they didn't want to do for a living a lot of time, maybe not yours specifically, but I think this is a generational thing. And we were told that we could do anything we wanted, right? That our lives, there's this almost pressure, I would argue almost a potentially, another thing, is it unnecessary, is it not, that our lives have to be purposeful, that like our lives, that we have to make money from our passions. That is a given of life. That is something that must happen. And what I'm actually questioning,
as opposed to what, I guess,
as opposed to maybe having a normal job and doing community theater, hypothetically, or having a normal job and going and just painting in your in your room. But we were our generation, which I'm not saying is wrong, wrong, or whatever, but our generation was taught that no, your passions should be what you make money from. Your passions should be the thing that support you financially.
And what do you think is bad about that?
What do I think is bad about
that? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just. I want to.
Well, it makes life. Well, it makes your whole. Which I would argue that this is why we're not a very service-driven generation. Why we're not a very community-driven generation. Why our generation is workaholics is because we're taught that the whole purpose of our life is to achieve the work dream or career dream that we have. And there's not
keep following me here with the idea, because this is what I mean about reckoning with the concept of entrepreneurialism.
Absolutely.
Because just hear me out. I give alligator tours in Louisiana. It's a huge passion of mine, and I want to continue to give tours of alligators in Louisiana, and I want to make a business out of it. But it's also a passion of mine, something that I love.
Sure.
Therefore, I'm going to put my heart and soul into it, and I'm going to try to spend my rest of my life doing that. And that is going to require me to do things because I want to work for myself that are not going to be fun. They're going to put pressure on me. So I guess
this is a millennial. What you just said, that dream is a millennial, late stage capitalistic dream. That is the dream of the millennial generation and the late stage capitalistic dream, which is that I will do my passion, my work will be my passion, and my passion will be my work, and that is the whole point of our educational system, of how we were raised, of the cultural messages we got. That is.
And I guess, but here's where I'll push back about the community theater and having a simple accounting job. First of all, there are many people who do that.
Sure.
There are many, 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 many people who do that. I mean, that's not, it's not like that's not accessible. There are millions of community theaters all over the world. that are, and even in New York City, there's a whole thing called like after work. It's like a whole thing for artists
Sure.
So I'm saying this because I don't think it's one size fits all.
I'm not saying this is bad, but what I'm saying is that this is an assumption that one is, you have to realize that this is an assumption that one is making. That is actually a cultural and late stage capitalist. I'm not saying that it's, obviously we're here because our parents were miserable doing their job or having their lives, so that's why they imposed this so much onto us, was because obviously the other way was miserable for them. But I would argue that this is
well, I'll just say my point of view about it, which I think is great.
Sure.
While I definitely, what I don't think is great is a lot of the points we're bringing up about what I think are real effects of late stage capitalism and the pressure. But to me, this feels like a very empowering way in this moment to move through it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not. Listen, there's sacrifices to everything, right? There are sacrifices. There's always a sacrifice to be made, right? And so the question is like, is your, I can't wait for the unmet potential episode. We actually, but I just want to be clear that this is where I think so much of the anarchy is coming from, and sort of the diarism that's happening is because truths like your passion should be your living, or that this, or that you need this, you need that, your government's responsible for this, all of these types of things are sort of challenged. These internal beliefs and dreams that might have been imposed on you, or cultural, whatever, so many things,
stay in the mic,
so many things are being challenged. So you're left, so a lot of people are left without knowing what their values are, what they actually, this is why we're in a tribalistic moment. It's because people don't have identities. They don't know what they want. They don't know what to believe anymore. So they'll go with the loudest voice. This is why there's so much tribalism and homogeny happening, is because it's an unstable moment and people are trying to ground themselves with something. And this is, I think this is the direction we were always headed in. But COVID, exponentially sort of increased this progression. It exponentially increased it. I would argue that it's Trump. One thing I will not disagree with is Trump is taking an authoritative. He is like taking a Caesar approach. He's taking Curtis Yarvin talks about like the monarchy. He is taking a monarchistic approach to governance, right? This is the Roman Empire. This is Julius Caesar all over again. Now, I think we would have come here eventually. I think we would have come because history moves in these cycles of sort of more populist, democratic, republic-driven, but they're also elite-driven, just like the Roman Republic, like elite-driven sort of leaders, to more of a populist figure who is a dictator. We would have been here eventually. I think COVID has has made that happen, as opposed to 50 years from now or 100 years from now happen now. Well, COVID is still affecting people now, Joshua. There's still true health effects. And, I think that this is interesting because it's easy to talk about COVID from a macro sociological, how it's changed. But it's sometimes, like for me, easy to forget that, oh yeah, this is actually a disease, like an illness that we are that is still here, and that we're still dealing with the repercussions of that. Like, it's easier to sort of look at the bigger macro picture of COVID sometimes without actually looking at like the personal day-to-day things that. And what I thought was interesting is that you spoke to somebody. How do you know Jessica?
I know Jessica Sporn because literally 20 plus years ago, my mom was her yoga teacher, and she went through my mom's yoga teacher training. And Jessica ran a community theater.
There you go.
In New Jersey called Gaslamp Players. And Jessica, then later on, we've always sort of been in each other's lives. She was an investor on Little Girl Blue, which I co-produced with Rashad, and she also ran until she got long COVID, Vanguard Theater Company alongside Janice Freeman Clark, of which I worked with a couple of times. And Jessica has been living with long COVID for some time now. And so I thought it was interesting, a topic that I don't think we actually discuss a lot. And it actually reveals a lot of the question marks still around COVID-19. And Jessica talks about a lot, including her journey with it. Like she didn't have a vaccine, about how much worse it was likely to be for her. So it was an interesting conversation.
Let's hear from her.
I had COVID 4 or 5 times. I can't quite remember. But actually, Jessica, that's kind of actually the reason why I'm saying it is because it kind of, not that it didn't matter to me, right? But it kind of was sort of like, the first time I got it was the worst, when I had the most odd symptoms. And but ultimately it became a thing where it was almost unrecognizable, when I would get it. And I was safe and I masked and vaccinated and all that.
Sure.
Can you walk us through your initial experience with COVID-19 when you first got sick and what your initial symptoms were like?
Sure. So I first tested positive April 8th of 2022. And Freddie had tested positive, my husband, 2 days prior to me. And we had been at an event where we were masked, I would say like 90% of the time. But then towards the end, we were talking in a group of people and they weren't masked and we took our masks off. And so that, that is my thought of where it came from, to the extent I can place it. Freddie, by the time I tested positive, Freddie was feeling better. So his lasted like 48 hours, even though he, followed the necessary protocols. I got extremely sick, like, the lungs, the headache, the body aches, and I ended up first going on a round of steroids, and when that didn't help, I went on Paxlovid or Paxlovid,
Sure.
however you say it, because I was doing that pulse ox thing, and my pulse ox kept dipping almost to the point where I should go to the hospital, but my doctor would say, take it again in a half hour and let's see what happens. And so I never did go to the hospital, which I give thanks to having had the vaccine, the steroids, and the Paxlovid. But for those, I probably would have been in the hospital, intubated, and who knows what.
Yeah.
So I was really sick, very, very weakened. And the only way I can explain it is that I felt like I just kept thinking, this is what it must feel like to be in hospice, just waiting to die, I could barely walk from my bedroom to the TV, from my TV back to the bedroom. And I would say after a month or so, I started to feel better. It was long. And then I noticed that the neurological, what people commonly refer to as brain fog, persisted. And that was particularly triggered by seeing an ambulance with flashing lights. So, which is more commonly associated with epilepsy or migraines. But, at that time, people knew so little.
Right.
So,
even in 2022, huh?
Oh, yeah. People were, the doctors still didn't really know. And they also just didn't know and still don't really know why some people have long haul COVID, which I do. And one thing my doctor thought, and again, this was very anecdotal because there have been no real studies about it, is that people with very strong immune systems who are otherwise very healthy, like on paper, I'm healthier than my husband, than Freddie. Once they succumb harder. Like once the virus conquers their immune system, it like digs in there, So he said that they were finding that actually, and again, all of it, this was anecdotal. He was talking about his patient population, that it seemed like the healthier his patient, once they got COVID, had a harder case of it and took longer to get better. And I will tell you that I'm part of this NYU research study that's following me for 5 years. And I've had COVID twice. So I had it again like a year and a half later or so.
And did that exacerbate symptoms?
It did. I had been starting to feel better. I had undergone a round of cognitive rehabilitation therapy at the Kessler Institute, which really more, taught me like coping mechanisms, getting up and walking away, recognizing triggers, not letting my brain get ultra fatigued, or if it did, to give it a long rest, almost like a marathon runner, right? Like you wouldn't run marathons in successive days, or when you're training, right? If you're doing a 10-mile run, the next day you might do a 5-mile run.
You're going to build
kind
up.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, in my work as managing director for Vanguard, I was basically running marathons all the time.
Right.
So I started learning that I had to, set a timer, get up, go for a walk, switch out, instead of using my brain to do planning or whatever, I would take a break and use my brain to listen to an audiobook while I took a walk or something like that.
And were these things that you sort of discovered yourself to cope, or were they suggested to you?
No, this was part of this cognitive rehabilitative therapy.
Understood.
So anyway, one of the very interesting things that's, I'm only in the year one of this NYU research study, is it's normal for people like up to 3 to 6 months out of having had COVID or right after the vaccine to test positive for COVID antibodies in their system.
Okay.
I'm 2.5 years from my last COVID incident, and I still have positive antibodies in my system. I actually have 6 times the amount of antibodies that someone who either just had COVID or had the vaccine would have. So the thought is that somehow my body thinks I still have COVID. And so it still is, produces the antibodies to fight it. And when it, I hate to make an analogy to the herpes virus, but that's what happens, right? Like you undergo some sort of stress or whatever, and that virus, which is in your system, right, probably for the rest of your life, flares up, right?
Randomly.
Then the same thing happens with people who have rheumatoid arthritis or I don't know what other kinds of things, but these kind of autoimmune things, viral things that, you can't antibiotic them out of your body.
And I'm just curious. So at what point was it around the brain fog moment with like the lights that you realized, something is not typical here? When did you realize that your symptoms weren't going away?
Yeah. So I am somewhat of a type A personality.
Yeah.
And I was running a theater company, a not-for-profit whose
the
mission,
easiest job in the world.
Yeah, Vanguard Theater Company, whose mission I believe in so very strongly. And it was very hard for me to step away and sorry, let me just quiet that, and to turn it off, because the organization depended on me so much. And so I kept pushing myself, I pretended I was taking the advice of, the Kessler Institute and my neurologist and whatever. I tried all these different off-label treatments for long haul COVID, like taking ADHD medication, which sometimes helps with brain stuff. I don't even remember all the different things, but they didn't help, and B, I didn't like the side effects from them. So I ultimately decided, and this was really hard and very painful, that I had to step away. I had to resign as managing director. I joined Vanguard's board of directors, and became co-chair of the board, thinking that it would just be different. I wouldn't really be working on budgets and Google spreadsheets and things like that. It would be more advisory and leadership oriented. And that's when I think I first really started to see that this is going to sound so crazy, but I have trouble ideating. You were in Putnam County Spelling Bee, that line, we ideate.
Yeah.
I can't ideate. I'll have an idea, and then I try to think about it or the steps that it would take to make that idea come to fruition. And it's like it starts sailing away from me like a helium balloon where you let go of the string. It's like, come back. And the other analogy I make, because it's so hard to describe to people, because it's not really a fog, but it's more just this inability to hold on and pursue analytically, which, I practiced law for 6 years. I was good at this kind of stuff. The other way I try to explain it, it's like in Matilda, right? Like if you could look at something and move it with your mind, right? If you really concentrated on that and you could make that thing move. And then sometimes you look at that thing and you can't make it move and you don't know why.
And you don't know when.
And you don't know, yeah. So for me, I would say it's kind of all the time. So I don't know, I've had these long haul symptoms for almost 2 years now. And so far, sadly, the learning is that if it doesn't go away within 2 years, this is probably going to be on and off for your life. But go ahead.
What have been, and it sounds like this is one of them, the inability to grasp or follow the lead of a thought, but what have been some of the most persistent or debilitating symptoms, and have any of them improved or worsened over time?
Yeah. So when I'm in the middle of a flare-up, and I would say it's like any, rheumatoid arthritis, I hate to use the herpes analogy, but whatever, a flare, I will actually have the experience where I wake up in the morning and it's not like I don't know who I am or where I am, but I'm just don't feel inside of me. Mm-hmm. And so I literally will say to myself, my name is Jessica Sporn, my husband's name is Fred Cordero, my daughter's names are so-and-so and so, and my dog is this, and whatever. Because when I first wake up, it's like my brain is just not functioning. So those thoughts are akin to, I guess if you're going to go into a yoga class, and your body is all stiff, you'll do some cat-cows, you'll thread the needle, you'll just do some stretching, and then your body gets warm enough that you can start getting into your practice. And so for me, in the morning when I'm in a flare, it's like nothing's happening in there. Like there's nothing. I think people meditate for years to get to this spot where there's nothing, there's no chatter. You know how normally you wake up and you got to do this, you got to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So it'll just be like, and the only way to get the gears going is for me to literally say to myself, my name is Jessica Sporn. I am married to Fred Cordero. I have 2 daughters. Here's my dog Nimby. Like, I know all these things. It's not like I don't know them.
But you have to, like, almost like you're saying, warm it up, like get the engine running. So okay. So it sounds like you're in this study, but at this point and I imagine that the doctors have been able to say, okay, this is long COVID.
Yeah.
But are there really any known effective treatment plans at this point?
No. It's all the treatment plans are just about providing like cognitive aids or I also, when I'm in a flare, I get very tired. So like I'll be up for a couple of hours and then it's like this overwhelming sense of fatigue, but not like sleepy, just
I need to
lay low. And so, I mean, listen, I feel very lucky. Like I've come to learn people who have more physical long haul COVID, like are people who were marathon runners who now can't walk up 2 flights of steps without having to stop and rest. There was a series in the New York Times about a cellist who has long haul COVID, and just the athleticism of bowing and everything all of a sudden knocked him out. And this was someone who used to practice like 5-6 hours a day, and he played in the Philharmonic and whatever. So first of all, I'm 66 years old. So retiring is not, it's not like I'm 30 something years old and sure. I can't function in a workplace anymore, right?
Sure.
So, okay, so now I'm retired and I've learned how to crochet. Like that's a new skill, and I'm making things and, donating them to places and, so I feel useful.
Well,
I exercise. So, on days, and even like if on tired days, like I'll make myself do it because I always feel better after. Like I never feel worse after.
Well, this was my next question because, just for context, you said this, but, you founded Vanguard Theater Company alongside Janice.
Okay, you can say that, but I came in 2 years after it was founded.
Okay.
I really helped grow it.
Got it. So you helped grow Vanguard Theater Company alongside Janice Freeman Clark, and like you said, became managing director and really helped to grow the company in a lot of different ways. So I imagine stepping down was a very tough decision for you because in some ways it's like a third child, but besides just the work piece, are there any other daily routines or habits that you had to accommodate your symptoms with that have really just changed sort of your personal world alongside your professional?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say that when I first stepped down from Vanguard, and then, first the managing director and then as chair of the board, I really, I went through this like grieving kind of process. And, I got a little bit like, sad because I just felt like I had been living a life of such purpose and use and, and not to have that anymore. And it was like okay, why am I here? What am I doing on this earth? What's my purpose? So that was a whole thing. And luckily I have a very supportive support network. And, my husband's great. Like, yeah, he's just very tolerant. And, if I say things like, I can't do the New York Times crossword puzzle anymore because I look at all those clues and it's just such a jumble and it's just so overwhelming. And he'll say, well, I never could do the New York Times crossword puzzle. So, okay, you're still functioning better than
Freddie.
like 75% of us.
Well, Jessica, this was actually a question I had too, because, I think long COVID is as you know, so many unknowns. I think that there are so many people who not have like put COVID in the rearview mirror, but are kind of wanting to move on from it. And here you are years later, kind of still in the thick of it. So what's my question? Well, have you found the support and understanding from friends, family, and even other colleagues in understanding and empathizing with your experience, or at least sympathizing with it?
I think so. It's very interesting. I was talking to my older daughter, Marielle, about this, about how in 2020, March 14th, 2020, or whenever Broadway shut down, and the whole world was quiet, and except for the sound of ambulances and fire trucks, and, everybody was touched by this in some way. And then, the whole quarantining and, we've all had so many losses, even losses we can't quantify because we didn't have experiences that we might have had, but for the fact we were in quarantine, right? We lost touch with people that we probably wouldn't have lost touch with if we were socializing with them in a bar or at work or whatever because of quarantine. Like, it was sort of like, okay, who's important enough for me to get out of my sweats and get on a Zoom with, right? Relationships ended that might have gone on, like there was just, and then of course, I think everybody knows somebody who died, from COVID. I mean, the first person I knew of was Nick Cordero, the wonderful man, actor, at prime of his life and so on. My uncle died from COVID. My father, missed going to the eye doctor for 2 years. And by the time he went back to the eye doctor, he had, they call it like an eye stroke, but something like, how they do that pressure in your pupils where they look through. Well, had he had his regular eye exams, they would have seen that. So, and now he's blind. And so his life changed dramatically, not because he had COVID, but because of experiences that he missed.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So, we have these days of remembrance for many different things, where we memorialize 9/11 every year, and that's like around 3,000 people who died, whether in the crash in the World Trade Center or because of they were firefighters who had respiratory diseases from going in,
Yes, of course.
And hundreds of thousands of people have died around the world, and it's like we could come together globally, because at that moment in the spring of 2020 we were together globally, right? To commiserate and see the humanity in one another and the joint experience of living on this planet. And instead, like you said, it's a rear view mirror kind of thing. So I think it's a big missed opportunity to not remember.
Do you think people with long COVID need most? And have there been any specific communities or resources that you have discovered that you believe might be helpful to other people?
Good question. I think people just really need. Sorry, I completely just lost the thread of that question.
No.
So you're saying support network. Support network is really friends and family. I think people have to understand that it's a real thing, and
Right.
I think that, listen, so many of us are struggling with things that are not visible,
Exactly.
right? Someone who has MS, who has flares, but on other days is walking and moving around normally, they still have MS, right? Even if they don't have a flare that day. So I think that we just have to be really kind and understand that so many people around us are carrying burdens or things or conditions that are not visible to the eye. And we have to give each other grace, you know? And it's like a person who has either chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or some other invisible thing, right? Like they're not making it up. If they say like their joints are hurting them and it's too painful for them to come out and have dinner or whatever, like give them grace. And just to say, I mean, like one of the things that I've really had to give up, and this is hard, is like, going to openings of shows. I have to be very careful when I go to the theater now, like if something has a lot of strobe lights. A lot of times now when I go to the theater, like Sunset Boulevard, I know I cannot see that show. It's going to be too much high contrast lighting, loud. I almost always now have earplugs when I'm out, ear filters that they're called loops, and they filter out the very highs and the very lows of most sound. And I have 3 sets, like, it's like the baby bear and the mama bear and the papa bear. Like I have ones that like really block out most everything, and then medium, and then, ones that let a lot of stuff in. And when I go to the theater now, I almost always have sunglasses because it's too much. It's, even I just went to see, right before I left, the most recent show I saw was The Great Gatsby, because our mutual friend Elena Ricardo is covering Daisy. And, I just know, like, how Broadway is now, there's like blaring, it's really loud, the group numbers. And so I have to have my earplugs and my sunglasses, like Greta Garbo. And I don't go to openings. I mean, I could have gone to the opening night of Gypsy because I'm an investor in that show. And I just knew it was just going to be too overwhelming, too many people, too much.
God, yeah. I mean, it's a whole lifestyle shift, obviously. It's a personal, professional, whole lifestyle shift. And, I'm appreciative of you being willing to share all this because, again, I'm someone who's also pretty informed and aware. And yet, even this whole conceit feels like a very distant to me and very distant, I think, to our world culturally.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to talk about this, because I deeply empathize, as I was partially saying, with just even the simple idea of the fear that it brings up in me of if to be living with it. So, I'm sorry that you continue to face this day to day, but I'm really grateful that you willing to share so transparently, because I think it's really important for people to understand what's going on for millions of
Joshua.
people,
Well, I feel very lucky that at some point in my life, I stumbled across some amazing yoga and meditation teachers.
That's
who
right.
we're talking about.
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Cole and Lotus Yoga, and for my teacher trainings. No, because Listen, I think whether someone has that or they have strong religious conviction, the belief in something,
Yes.
I think is very, or, some sort of framework for working through your own personal stuff is very important because, sometimes I think to myself, well, yeah, I feel like this, but I'm also not a hostage in Gaza, or I'm not a Palestinian person whose home has been bombed to rubble. Like
Yes. Well, thank you, Jessica.
One thing I think is interesting to discuss is how we are still dealing with not just the effects of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but of COVID now. Like you did, how many times you said there was a week where how many shows were canceled with Charlie?
5 out of the 9.
I mean, that's wild because of COVID.
I know. Well, and here's what I will say, though. It's interesting because then our closing, a lot of people got COVID. And the thing is that they were like deathly ill. People had been asymptomatic, but then they got so sick that, and so they were dropping like flies. And now there was, of course, because one of the things with COVID is that it continues to morph, just like any disease.
Of course. Well, it's just interesting, right? Because like it's still here, obviously, and there's still, and my question is, something that I'm really interested in is like, what's the place of employers specifically, and let's say, a theater or a, if I produce my series, right? What is my responsibility when it comes to protecting the people I employ? What is that responsibility, if there is one, right? And so, there's this, I am curious about this because, like, there's this thing called the bona fide occupational qualification, which is a legal exception that allows employers to set specific job qualifications that might otherwise be considered discriminatory under normal circumstances. The key requirement is that the qualification must be reasonably necessary to the normal operation of the business, right? So in a performing arts context, right? If a performer cannot meet essential physical, vocal, or artistic demands of a role, their exclusion from a job is lawful, right? So this is why somebody can't sue me.
Basics.
So this is why somebody can't sue me.
Can you just break it down very simply?
Yeah. So somebody can't sue me for not casting them in a show because they have blonde hair, right? Somebody can't sue me for discrimination in that respect, or because what this bona fide occupational qualification is that things that would normally be seen as discriminatory, right? I'm excluded from the consequences of that because that person meets the artistic standards that I have for the project. So I can't be sued for casting somebody because they're too fat. Not casting somebody because they're too fat, or because I can't be sued for that, right? So how does this relate to COVID or immune compromised people, right? Because if somebody is immunocompromised, right, and I don't provide air filtration for them, or I don't have people, if I don't attempt to make the rehearsal room or the set as safe as possible for those people, that could be seen as discriminatory, right? I'm discriminating against the person by not making my set, my rehearsal room safe for them. But the reason why this clause is why it is not considered discriminatory.
Because if that person is immunocompromised, then they shouldn't be responsible because technically they're not up to the job.
So but do you see how this sort of can be a danger? This is why there's immunocompromised advocates, why there's mask advocates. It's because equity is about making the space safer and accessible to everybody. So is it the theater's job? Is it the studio's job, the set's job to make the space as equitable as possible for people who could get COVID and get really sick, for COVID?
Well, let's be clear. Let's be clear. Perfect, of course. Why not? But the other side is, of course, I think the point you're trying to make is, should these institutions have to put out more money than they might be otherwise interested in putting out, to look out for the health of others? Because I don't think there's a person in the world who was like, should we make this space safer or not? That someone's going to be like, not safe, fun. But I think, to your point, should a set have to bear the responsibility of paying out?
I think this is interesting. I think this is very interesting, because to be clear, from actors' perspectives, the actor unions, what they have done, I have talked to producers who said, I wish that they could just tell us what to do. Because right now, the unions have put all the responsibility on the producers to, quote, make their set more equitable for people who could get, that's entirely on the producers' shoulders. So they have to make a decision, whereas...
And just to be clear, though, because it's interesting, right? Because I could see that being a problem both ways.
Sure.
Because that's in that instance, what you're complaining about is like, oh, I don't want to rub anybody the wrong way. Well, who cares? That's what being a job. That's what being a leader is. So you're gonna bother some people. So you decide. Some people are gonna like it. Some people aren't. So to me personally, I go, amazing, blessing. We love that freedom. If the unions or whomever were to say this is what it has to be, that could also be problematic.
Yes, but then here's the question, right? Is like, I mean, I agree, right? And it's all about, look, it's the leader it's the leader's job to sort of decide what kind of set do they want to run, right? Do they want to, or rehearsal room? But what I find interesting about this too is like, well, I've done sort of a 180 on this, because I used to be like, well, kind of like on the side of like, well, that it costs too much money to do that. It costs too much money to do that. But the question is like, when you're making a movie, when you're putting on a play, which is, I'm not going to argue here, is you're stretched for budget, right? Number one thing that this Mackenzie Moyer, who I spoke to, who's really informed of this, and like, she made good points. It's like, well, ultimately, will it actually cost the theater more money to have, to invest in PPE, to invest in, tests on site, to invest in understudies? Would it actually save them money in the long term because they don't have to cancel 5 performances? Or would these would higher COVID awareness actually save the theater money in the long term? That's one option.
Let me also say this, one of the things that I think is, and I think it's valuable to have heard from Jessica about this, I think it is easy for you and I, who do not have underlying health concerns,
of course,
who might not even have to go home every day, to people who are actually,
of course,
compromised, who in the arts industry in particular, where we know every job is so tricky to come by, that when you do have an opportunity, you artists in particular will put themselves in bad situations in to do what they love, just to get followed.
Well, exactly. No, but this is this is the ultimate. This is why this question really fascinated me, and this is why, like, I bring up, like, it's like, when we kind of recorded this last time, I was talking about like my brothers are autistic. What's the responsibility? Is it the responsibility of an employer to make the space safer for them and more accessible to them? Just like, is it the responsibility of the theater to make the theater more accessible and safer for people who are immune compromised or have loved ones who are immune compromised, to protect them? And one thing that Mackenzie was pointing out was like, well, listen, I think that you should aim as high as you can, because, I was even thinking about this. Like, I'm somebody who let's just say, you know, not the biggest mask fan. I'll wear a mask if there's a mandate, of course, but I'm not gonna, you know, a part of me is like, well, fuck, you know, we're out in the world. It's like if somebody gets sick, somebody gets sick. It's like I can't walk around protecting everybody. However, when I step into a rehearsal room, wearing a mask if I am sick, let's say, what I'm like open to is like, well, no, that is me saying that people are welcome here. This is a welcoming, open space for people who may be immune compromised, right? It's not about even virtue. It's not even virtue signaling as much as it is just going like, is this inconvenient for me? Yes. But when I step into a rehearsal room, we're supposed to represent all of humanity, right? And me wearing a mask is a way for me to say like people who are immune compromised are welcome here. Me saying my pronouns, even though I don't, am I outraged by doing it? No. But like, you know, I'm not like, yay, everybody introduced. Like me doing that in a rehearsal room is me saying people are welcome here, right? Everybody's welcome here. People who would now, again, where I think that it needs to be returned, and this is a larger conversation, is like, well, I think Republicans should be, Trump supporters should be in a rehearsal room as well. There should be a welcome, you know, if we're truly going to welcome all of humanity, then let's welcome all of humanity to the best of our ability. But
well, of course, but that has not, but just taking the mask thing as an example, what's easier to do, mask or not mask? So this goes back to the point, and let me be clear, easier to do in terms of welcoming. I don't like wearing a mask. It's very annoying. But I was very annoyed a lot of times. I was like, oh, I'm gonna put a fucking mask on. I mean, and trust me, actually, speaking of Charlie, everyone was walking around with masks on. I didn't wear a mask once throughout the entire thing. You know, it just didn't want to wear it. But the point is that to your point about Trump supporters being in the room, I don't think we should assume all Trump supporters don't want to wear a mask. I think there are plenty of Trump supporters who are happy wearing a mask. But if there were any conservatives who like, I don't want to wear a mask, all I'm saying is like, well, you can still be in the room, just wear a mask. And if that is such a big deal to you,
yeah,
then that is again your no problem.
well, no, I guess what I'm talking about is equity, because like I'm not even talking about mask mandates. I'm talking about like when a theater invests money in infiltration systems, into having separate nights for mask only nights, when they invest in having PPE on site, when they invest in these things, you know, that is a way, yes, to keep potentially people from getting like is literally a way to make the space safer for immune compromised people, and as a result making it more of a welcome space for those people. Now the question is that their responsibility? Is it employers and producers' jobs to make their space safer for people by investing their, you know, is it their responsibility to put a handicap ramp outside their building? Is that their, it's the equivalency of that? Is it their responsibility to do that?
And just to say, and let's take a not-for-profit specifically. Yes. That is a charity.
Yes.
That I'm assuming the government aids, even if it was just in the benefits of what that means to be a not-for-profit organization, and you are serving the public and you are employing people and you have a certain level of responsibility. First of all, your own home, what you do back at 1209
of course
Lulu Street, who
course
cares? But if you are going to be welcoming people in, asking people to give you money, paying people out, then there's a different consideration of responsibility. Of
course.
And I know you're saying that, as you're acknowledging that. But therefore, when I walk in a space as your employee, specifically, or as your audience member, yes, I expect to be safe and taken care of. And that includes, you know, if we are living still, to your point, and per Jessica's point about long COVID and still all the things we don't know, living with a disease that killed so many people, that is
right.
morphing.
So you're running a theater tomorrow, and you're running a theater tomorrow. What is your responsibility to make your space?
Well, look, I used to say this about, excuse me, I used to say this about working with the deaf. If you're not able, if you can't, I was on a crusade when Tribes first came out. I would call theaters around the country who were doing hearing actors. I'm like, what are you doing? And like, well, we tried to find deaf and hard of hearing actors. We couldn't find them. I said, well, if you can't afford to do the play that you should do, you don't do the play. And for me, if you can't afford to create an environment that and
like
and
air
I understand the
purifiers,
subjectivity.
HVAC systems, UVC.
I don't know. We'd have to look at it.
But yeah, I mean, it's not cheap. But right, and so, but I think you and I are actually in agreement on this. Is that it is the theater's responsibility, because especially because we're making art. If this was to train police officers, I think that's a little different, right? There is physical. This is why I bring up the discrimination thing at the top. There are certain spaces that discrimination is necessary, where certain people are not going to be welcome, right? Because that's what the job requires. When it comes to performing, when it comes to, making art, this is why, those spaces do need to be as equitable as possible, because we're supposed to represent all of humanity. And that's why I said the Trump support, including, making sure that all voices are represented and making the space as equitable as possible, right? So I think you and I are in agreement that it is like, where I've done a 180 on this is realizing like, wow, like now look, I don't think that I should be forced to test by a theater. I don't think a theater could force, because that's different. That's now intruding into my medical information and medical history and trying to, that I don't agree with, but
you do have to be, depending on if you wanted to be an astronaut, we would need to check way more than if you had COVID.
Sure.
Health requirements for jobs is not a new thing. And so whether it's a drug test or a COVID test, what's the difference?
That's a good question.
Because I hear what you're saying.
Well, I do find it interesting because it is, because, and the reason why it's not as simple or as easy, right, is because take a nonprofit theater is struggling. They don't have money to spare. They don't have money to blow, right? So these are investments, and there has to be an acknowledgement of like, these are real investments to make, and that will, maybe long term, hopefully would, and one thing Mackenzie said, which she said is, well, one thing that is a common denominator is everybody's going to get sick. She was like, that is something everybody's going to experience. So to make that is an investment for everybody, not just for the immune compromised. And so, it really has actually opened me up to like, sort of a libertarian approach in the rehearsal room, which is like, you do me, I do me. You do you, I do me. Whatever. To like, no, it's like, this is not inhibiting on my, now in the comfort of my own home, even, being on the street to an extent, or just doing anything else. But I do think a rehearsal room and a set should be somewhere where everybody feels welcome, including me. And that's why I did bring up the Trump thing, because not that I'm not a Trump supporter, I just want to be clear, but I have some beliefs that may be not kosher for some people, that aren't hateful. They're just like a little off kilter. I should be those just like an immune compromised person should be welcome in the space, and somebody who's deaf and somebody, we should make the room as equitable as possible. It's not just equitable for the left. It should be equitable for everybody. That a rehearsal room and a set should represent all of humanity. One last thing up, that is idea. And so anything I can do to make the space more equitable for everybody, this is a change I'm going to start to make. I'm going to start to actively, I start rehearsals for something in a week. I actually am going to start actively making this change. I am going to be much more health conscious. I'm going to have hand sanitizer. Like, I just want people to feel safe because it's no skin off my sack. I want people to feel like this is somewhere where they are welcome. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do know what you're saying. I think, while imperfect, I think that's what we should all sort of strive for, right? I mean, it's going to be because we would want the same for us. I mean, this is okay. Here's a random example. This is so stupid. This show I was just doing. I did the show, we did the costume fitting fine. I wore the shoes throughout the rehearsal process. As soon as we got into performances, my feet were killing. It wasn't my feet, my knees. I was getting these shooting pains in my knees. Okay, so I had to get insoles. Well, the insoles made the shoes too small. So then the shoes started squeezing my feet. They had to buy me 3 new pairs of shoes. What's the point in relation to this? Well, look, it's because I'm not 22.
Right.
So I need better. So I need better shoes. I felt bad. I mean, they got them on Amazon. They were really bad shoes, but the I'm not coming for them. I'm saying it because I got it, and they weren't that expensive. But the point is that I maybe 15 years ago could have been like, oh, I'll just do it in these shoes. I can't do that anymore. And so, as we morph, as you have needs, and what are because everybody's different, and whether you're a girl, a boy, sick, not sick, COVID, not COVID. Everybody has different needs. And us being, to your point, just everybody being aware of
people's needs.
How can I make this? Exactly.
I love that. And it's not about I think that's really special. I think that's actually this is actually a really good opportunity. This is actually a really good opportunity for me to be like, oh, because look, I want to be able to express an opinion that is not a hateful opinion or an attacking opinion without somebody jumping down my throat in a rehearsal room. That is super important to me.
Exactly.
Right. I want to be able to express an opinion and have a point of view in a rehearsal room without somebody jumping down my throat.
Yes, for sure.
I want to be able to experience that. So therefore, if I want to be able to experience that, I should make the room as safe as possible for everybody else too, because I am expecting that in return. Yeah. I'm expecting to be made to be to show up as my authentic self and be safe in a room. So if I'm expecting that, then I should expect that. Then I should do that for other people. That's my big realization with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do, and what it's making me think about is sometimes it's about seeking out that information. What do I mean? Well, sometimes it's not always going to be obvious.
Yeah.
What someone else's needs might be, or why that need matters. Let me just not to make this overly political, but just to give a quick example. I think sometimes it's well, I certainly don't want to get into the trans stuff because that's for what it's worth. That is where Trump has completely lost me. Where I don't give a shit what you do. That dehumanization, unfortunately, has just I don't care. I could be a millionaire tomorrow. It wouldn't matter to me. That has crossed a complete line, just to say. But this idea of representation mattering in the arts in particular, when people are looking at people, I'm saying this for myself because I don't want to go into it, but I'll say this. I got asked a question the other day about diversity in casting in terms of something. And I was talking about it from the lens of, well, it's about quality, but at the same time, Mike, per this conversation, it's easy for us on one side to go, well, this is our experience, and therefore,
of course,
we see these priorities as opposed to.
Well, this is where compromise, though. But this is when people have different needs. This is where one must compromise, because I don't think there's anything wrong with you wanting to cast the best people you think are for the parts are in the parts. Nothing wrong with that. But where compromise starts to play is that, okay, let's say that there's one person of color in that cast of all white people or in that team of all white people. That space is not going to feel as safe for them potentially.
Yes, exactly. That's a great point, Mike, though.
You also have your needs. of working with the people that, as the director, the people that you want to work with. So this is where a compromise needs to, because I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but your needs are, like, let me give you an example, right? It's like, if I yell in a scene, if I'm yelling, or if I'm like, again, I don't think touching is different. Like, I think there are certain lines, right? There are certain lines. Like, but if I'm yelling and throwing shit around and nobody's getting hurt, or if I'm whatever in a scene, that may make somebody feel unsafe. They have a need where they need to feel safe in the room. Heard. I have a need in the space that I need to express myself. So, and I don't need a filter. Now, look, when it comes to touching, when it comes to, that's different, right? I think that there are some clear lines of right and wrong, right? But I'm not, okay, you have some needs, I have some needs. How do we make this equitable for both of us? Because I don't think it's, that is compromise. That is compromise.
Yes.
And so, like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying here is like, but I'm very curious by all, because it's easy to become like this is all bullshit. This is too much. This is woke. This is da-da-da. Hey. We all have different needs. We all have different needs. And the question somebody has to ask themselves is, where are you willing to compromise? Where are you not willing to compromise? Right? Like that's why I say, and the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up, is like, like I did a show and it was, and I've never voted for Donald Trump. I do not like Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump. Okay, I do. I genuinely hate Donald Trump. But there was like a rehearsal where we're talking about government and stuff, and it was just like, basically it was like we were in a perfect little echo chamber of like, everybody was like, well, it's just like Trump. It's just like da. And I'm like, yeah, totally. But then I'm also thinking, oh, but it's also like this, and it's also like that too. And I'm having these other thoughts, and not. But why did I feel like I couldn't express that? Why did I feel like I couldn't express that? Something that's not like, it's also like this. It's also like this, is because the problem with a lot of this equity shit is it's like, well, it's equitable for some, for certain people. Like it's going to be equitable for certain groups, but not for other groups. How do we truly make it equitable for everybody? That without also like, I'm not saying somebody with a Nazi uniform should be able to walk into the room and feel safe. That's not, it's fucking fascinating. And it does relate to COVID because, again, what is an employer's responsibility to make their space feel safe for people who get sicker quicker or sicker easier? What is their responsibility? It's fascinating. I see. This is why I did want, does it make sense, Kyle, what I want to talk about? Because it is a larger sort of question in so many ways that I think COVID has opened up for us, right? It's like COVID is sort of, anyway, whatever.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. There's a lot of topics covered in a lot of different areas, and I
think it's going to be a good episode
from COVID. Let's do comfort food performances. Mine is in honor of you, kind of, not really, but it is. We watched. Now this is going to be weird that I'm going to say this, but you'll understand why. Elephant the other day, which I'd never seen. No.
Elephant?
Do you know what it's about?
The school shooting? Yeah, it's about Columbine, right?
Exactly. And so now that you know why I was saying that. It has nothing to do with elephant.
Like,
because it was
fat pig.
No, because I was really taken with. I'd never seen it. It's an old movie. I was really taken with the style of how they were dealing with it in such a removed way, really
like clinical.
Meaning,
I've never seen it.
Yes, the students, it was very forced. So that, but good, because you didn't really have a chance to emotionally invest in the characters in a way you wouldn't want to.
I have to see it. I know I've heard it's a good movie.
No, that's when I was thinking about you watching it, because I'm like, this is an interest, because it was how they were, that piece of how they were dealing with a very sensitive topic was really quite nice, really super interesting film. So Elephant, that's my comfort. That's my comfort.
Yeah, I would say, you know, have you ever seen JFK?
No.
Okay, so John Candy has a
John
3-minute cameo, basically.
Uh-huh.
That's fucking great in that movie.
Okay.
It's a great movie. I really recommend it.
What is
JFK.
it called?
So Oliver Stone
Okay.
wrote it in the 90s, and it, like, you know, it's based on this true story of this New Orleans DA, Kevin Costner, who, like, thinks he uncovers the conspiracy to kill JFK. And you know, because a lot of it was in New Orleans. It was a lot of, like, New Orleans characters, New Orleans figures. But John Candy, I think, I don't know who he plays. He plays this guy, and he has this scene at lunch with Kevin Costner, where Kevin Costner's, like, asking him questions. He's like, "You don't know," and he's like this, like, sort of like jive, like John Candy, sort of this jive guy, and he's like, "You don't know how big this goes, man." It's a great scene, and it's shot super well. It's a phenomenal scene. I would just go watch that scene on YouTube. It's a really, really great scene. John Candy, JFK.
Candy.
All right,
You're so talented.
goodbye.
Bye, friends.